He talks about a dream. That dream is not only his dream, it is my dream. I'll tell you something, that actually out of this group here, I probably have met several members of this group in countries that have spanned Egypt, Kenya, Nigeria, Bolivia, England, Canada, where else? Several states. But, almost like, Michael, we've been Tanzania and Kenya. And Kenya, Tanzania, Nigeria. Mina, England. You're a bit fancy, man. But it's been a blessing to actually, that out of this group, for us as the Coptic Medical Association, and maybe in the second session, I'll talk a little bit more about the history and the background of what started this group. And what we look at is like, okay, when Mina's saying like, our group of physicians are on vacation in Jamaica. My family's in Jamaica from yesterday. But for me, it's far more exciting to be with you guys than actually being there. Why? Because this is where my passion, where my heart is. And even my wife understands that. She says very well that, for me, that's my passion. And to me, to actually take those 2 days and spend it with you guys is the world for me. So I would never trade it in for anything else. So trust me, I'm not sacrificing it.
Thank you.
So guys, when you think of the Christian healer, you guys have been so far in a great spiritual journey, and I want to give it a little bit of depth about the Christian healer, because all of us here are here to what? To heal. What does it mean to be a Christian healer? So you've all read books, you've been to conferences, you've heard many things. What is a verse when you hear about Christian healing and a healer? What verse comes into your mind? We had it on our shirts, for example, in Bolivia. But there are many verses. I want to hear some. Any verse. Tell me something. I'm the Lord your healer.
You use my example.
Huh?
I said you use the example.
Oh, I'm the Lord your healer.
Yeah.
Okay, what else? What other verse? I want to start. I was talking about like the Gospels of the hours. We've got the Gospel of the 9th hour and the 11th hour. The 11th hour is actually, talks about direct healing. Okay, but for me, if you ask me about what is my favorite verse in healing, it is this. When you look at actually in the Gospel of Luke chapter 5, and the power of the Lord was present to heal them. Talk about healing presence. I was in a conference about 2 months ago, and that conference was actually about prison ministry. But the guy had nothing to talk about other than this whole concept of a healing presence. And how can we transform ourselves as servants into a healing presence? So it's not about what you say, it's not about what you do, it's about who you are. And the question I'm going to ask us today, do we have that power? So not only what I'm doing with my mind and my brain and my prescription pad, or with manipulations, or with my dental work, it's not what I do, but are you a healing presence? And not only are you a healing presence, but do you have that power? Just like when God, because you know what, one of the beautiful things about orthodoxy, and everyone shares that in other denominations, but I think orthodoxy exemplifies that more than anything else. It is focused on incarnational Christianity. What does it mean incarnation? That Christ, when he was up there, or God, when he was up there, didn't just send us a solution. No, he came down, he incarnated. Why? Because the solution had to come from inside out. So I can stand over here and give you a whole prescription of like, okay, here's what you need to do to become a Christian healer. But honestly, that's not what I want to convince you with today. I want to convince you that it has to happen from inside. Okay? I'm not going to give you any solutions. I'm going to talk about us, our character, our insight. And at the end, I'm going to challenge all of us. Do we have that healing presence? Do we have that power or not? And this question would apply for you whether you're a student or you graduated, whether you're a resident or you're contemplating any kind of service. By the way, this is not only for medical people, but even for anyone who's serving in the area of the Lord. Okay? Do you have that presence that when you come into the room, we call it Muslim baraka, but it's not just about being blessed. No, there's something deeper in that. When you come into the room, do people feel that presence of the Lord inside? Or are you just another physician, dentist, pharmacist, physical therapist, chiropractor? 18 years ago to the date, I took my last exam in my med school. Okay, it was 1995. I was kind of testing on my last exam in med school. Okay, and at that time, and those who know it, don't blurt it out right away. Everyone in med school at that time dreamt of 5 things that start with the letter AIM. Okay, 5 things. Because at that time for us, the power and you're it. You got it, man. Okay? Is 5 things that start with the letter AIM. Okay, so let's try to guess a little bit now. Arabiya? Arusa? They have to come in order. Actually, no. Okay. No. غير اللي قبلها. How are we gonna work? عيادة, exactly. So the first one was a medical clinic, عيادة, okay? And then عربية, you know, and then those two will drag the عروسة because you'll like that. And then, okay, عيادة, no, I don't want عيادة. Does anyone know what are the last two? That's like, you know what, when you reach big. Huh? Amara, okay. But what is L? You know, what is that? What for Amara? Or you know, Amara, they come hand in hand. When you really reach, you're an interventional cardiologist. You talk about it, okay? Aizba, a ranch. You have a ranch. Aizba doesn't mean Aizba. And then Amara. Okay. So everyone, when they were going to med school, that was the running joke. Is that, you know what? If you really would want to achieve it all, you have the power now as a healer, as a practitioner, not a healer, practitioner. You get those 5. But the reality is that when you look at our field right now, and I'm going to give you some examples, but not necessarily those apply only to medicine. They apply to any field, whether it's dental, whether it's pharmacy. Nursing, not as much. Physician assistant, not as much, because you guys are smarter. You guys actually want to do the work without actually getting the stress. But why is there a lot of reports right now? This is actually very, very sobering, by the way. And I'm not trying to kind of tell you, like, you know what, hey, you made a mistake. You know, too late, sucks. But the reality is that more and more reports, like you see in Forbes magazine, okay, half of people who went into medicine would say they would not choose it again. Half. In fact, when you would ask people now who are in practice, they'll tell you even less than that, would not ever recommend that. That's number one. You see this from another medical magazine, Southern Medical Journal. Physicians are not invincible. Look at this. So we think that, you know what, we've got that power, we've got the healing presence. The reality is that if you're a physician, you are more than twice as likely than the general population to kill yourself. Can you believe that? More than twice likely than the general population to commit suicide. That is really sad. When you think about something that is supposed to be for a lot of people their dream, okay, now you're losing it. And even when you think about, you know, I can't think this is very ironic. Okay, psychiatrist, Mina, welcome to your world, okay? So when you think actually of this article about the improving health of psychiatrists, because you would think a psychiatrist, he would be able to identify the warning signs early, he'll be able to cope, he'll be able to adapt, he'll be able to treat himself, okay? And to know when the warning signs for them when they get in trouble. They look over this, that actually the highest job dissatisfaction is in people with psychiatry. Highest job of dissatisfaction. Okay? So talking about psychiatrists, you know, there is a word in Muslim kibab nagar mukhala. So when we feel depressed, when we feel stressed, when we feel down, where do we go to? Psychiatrist. Well, guess what? The psychiatrist has even worse problems than you are. You want to talk about satisfaction? This one is going to be very saddening. Okay? Among physicians, about 10 to 20% higher divorce rates. In my area in Minneapolis, between interventional cardiologists, divorce rate is 60%. 60%. The moment I took that fellowship, I told my wife, we've got more than a 50% chance of getting divorced. Okay? Why? Because you know what? There's no satisfaction. In fact, I can tell you, and people think that we as cops are invincible. We're not. I know of really some tough stories of people who are servants, who are actually servant leaders. Okay? And once they finished their training and got into their job, they ended up leaving their wives, divorcing their wives, leaving the church completely. Completely. And that's hitting the Coptic church very hard at this day. And the problem is that, you know what, we have a very hard time understanding what does it mean to be a Christian healer. So sometimes I like to play fun games. And one day when we were with our group of physicians, I asked the physicians to kind of think for a little bit. I said, you know what, I like images. I said, you know what, think of an image that describes your current practice. These are physicians and dentists who have been practicing for about 10 to 15 years. So they've been in practice for a long time. So about 15 years, where it should be like, you know what, you have most of your income potential at that time because you've done your training, you're very, very skilled, your day's going well, you're in a good place, you've got the best life. I said, what would you describe your life at that time? And here's the image that one person gave me. Okay? He said that my life is just like going down the toilets. And you know what? I gotta play it because look at that. Okay. He said, sad. He said that my life is like a toilet. You know why? Because I feel just absolutely sucked in. And I found this really interesting quote from Oscar Wilde. Look at that quote, guys. There is no greater vortex than mankind itself. We are our worst enemies. We are our worst enemies. So for him, he described himself that he's being sucked into without any power. Initially, when you're on top of the vortex, when you're in the top part, you have some power. The deeper you get, the less power you have. You get sucked in. Why? Because the power that is getting you down is suctioning you more and more. And at that point, he said, you know what? My life is down the drain. So the reality is that why are physicians, why are dentists, why are pharmacists, why are healthcare providers, when we need to be the healers, when we need to be the people offering hope and faith, offering solution, why do we describe our lives like that? That's a very big question. I'm going to try to answer it in a couple of simple ideas. The problem is that when you look at all of us, why are you here? Why did you guys travel, some from far distance, from a near distance? Why are you all here? Because we still embark and we still hold on to a lot of ideals. Whether it is moral ideas, whether it is spiritual ideals, whether it is Christian morals, or actually just feeling the good sense of charity. These ideals give us a sense of altruism. Give us a sense of, you know what, we want to do something that is good. And the reality is that this altruism feeds back into ideals. Why? Because it's a positive feedback mechanism. The more you have these ideals and the more you practice and the more you feel that God is blessing you, the more you feel altruistic. And then this altruistic nature enforces your what? Your ideals. The reality was when you're going right now into practice. So right now you're in med school or dental school or in pharmacy school or physician assistant school. And then you end up going to practice. You start losing control very, very early. Why? Because people are judging you all the time, on your productivity, on your schedule. People are doing your schedule for you. Patients, are controlling sometimes what they want and what they don't want to do. Hospitals, hospital systems. You all heard about the Obamacare, about how hard it's going to get for people practicing in the next age. The problem when you have this loss of control, you end up with a lot of fear. Fear from being judged, fear from mistakes. You don't want to make a mistake. You don't want to, get into trouble. You don't want to get sued, okay? You don't want that your group will come and tell you, like, hey, you're not pulling your weight. You're going to get fired, okay? Fear of judgment, that, a lot of us overlook each other's work. Dentists compare works. It's all the teeth, like, look at what he did. There is a lot of judgment, and this fear ends up that when you have this fear, okay, this fear makes the loss of control worse. It's completely against altruism. When you look at a current situation, it is not where we dreamed to be. Partly because of the fact that we have no control over a lot of things in our system, and partly because we're geared to be afraid. And when we're afraid, we can't be altruistic. If you'd ask me, George, what image would I use? I'll tell you what image would I use. I did 9 years of medical training when I was in med school. Okay, I did 4 years of internal medicine, 1 year of research, 4 years of fellowship after that. Okay. Just to, when Mina was talking about interventional cardiology, it was a very, very bitter and high price to pay for that. When I look back at my time, here's the only image that can come to my mind. I was a slave. I was absolutely a slave. For me, it was a slave to the system because I wanted the system to approve of who I am. Okay? And I wanted to prove to them that I'm the most competent and I'm worth their trust. Honestly, I screwed up big time. I remember in 2004, I was working with one of the top scientists in the country, in the world actually, in stem cell. And at that time I was interviewing at all 3 Harvard hospitals, Baylor, and Stanford. And I was so desperate for approval at that time to say that, you know what, hey George, because the recommendation letter, how important it is. It's like, whatever you want, I'll do for you, doctor, whatever her name is. My wife was pregnant at that time with our second child. And I remember vividly that, I had a pig model with a pig heart, and we were coming and approaching a deadline for the American Heart Association that we need to submit the abstract. We needed this data to be produced very quickly. So we're working day and night. And, anyone of you who's done bench research, you know how timely it is. You thaw things, you have to be ready to get them done and injected and move on. You can't wait. Otherwise, you lose probably, months of work. So at that time, we had took an argument. My wife, fortunately, I love her to death, but all our 3 kids were born early, 4 weeks. How can you plan that? Can't plan it. So it was about 4 weeks. She was still had 4 weeks in her due date. And I was like, what I was doing about doing my work, and I got a pig heart out that was genetically modified, so it was very expensive. One of those pig hearts was about $5,000, because genetically modified. And I had to do the experiment on them. And I set it up, and everything ready to do the experiment. And my wife called me and said, I'm in labor. I think we need to go to the hospital. I said, okay. So I literally, as a stupid father, went back home, took her home, took her to the hospital, dropped her off at the hospital, because I tried to take the day off from my research supervisor, this top-notch scientist in the world. And she said, no, the pig heart cannot be let go. And I was the only one who was doing that experiment at that point, unfortunately. Sadly to say, I missed my daughter's birth. Sadly to say, Katrina right now is 9 years old. I was not there. I was not there for my wife. I was not there for my daughter at the time they were born. But that kind of, that to me exemplified the problem in our system. We allow ourselves to become slaves to many different things. Whether it is to the research supervisor that I'm waiting on the recommendation letter for, whether it is to the president of that health system that is going to give me that job, whether it is this residency program director that is going to allow me to take that job, whatever it is, we allow ourselves to become a slave. So the image that I used for myself was a slave. The reality is that you don't practice in vacuum. You don't practice in vacuum. I tried to look for a Coptic icon for creation of Adam. I couldn't find one. And if anyone finds a Coptic icon for creation of Adam, I could maybe actually in Bolivia. Maybe in Bolivia I think there is one. But anyhow, so the only one I found was a Russian Orthodox, but it's like, why does it have a 6-pack? Was Adam created with 6 packs and then we lost it after that? Doesn't make any sense to me. But like this is a Russian Orthodox, like, look at the guy. Too bad. It's like maybe if we were created, didn't like grow like that, maybe it would have been created with a 6-pack. But anyhow, the reality is that when you look at how Adam was created, when we say we're created on God's image, I'm going to challenge you by saying, you know what? You either practice on God's image or you don't practice on God's image. As I said, Christianity and Orthodoxy in particular is very incarnational. What do you incarnate? What values do you incarnate when you practice in your field? Whatever it is. Do you practice the image of God as a healer, or you practice your own image and what satisfies you? What is the problem with Adam and Eve? They looked for what? Their own glory. Well, guess what? In our medical and dental field, it's a big time our own glory. When physicians and practitioners just take their work and absolutely show it to each other as like, I'm the best thing ever that has happened under the sun. Okay? When we allow ourselves to judge, why is it? Because it's my own glory. So either you're practicing according to God's image, or you're practicing according to your own image. And that's the problem that happened with Adam and Eve. It was told them, do you want to be like gods? And the reality is that, in several hospitals, when you go in several hospitals, they'll tell you, this program director is like God here, period. He's like God. You can't go against him. And in fact, that's one of the main reasons why a lot of hospital systems started to put systems to prevent medical errors. Why? Because a lot of doctors were gods. Nobody could even question them, and medical errors happened. And hospitals got into deep trouble, and they got sued. So because of that, they changed the whole system. But the reality is that the problem is still coming from us. So I ask you about the image that I felt and my friend felt. The image that my friend felt was the image of a vortex being sucked in. My image was a slave. This is the true image of the Christian healer. Does anyone know what this is? What is on top of the Ark of the Covenant? Mercy seat. The true healer is the mercy seat. Because if you embody the true Christian healer, you become, for some people who are so desperate in their life and at the point of death or at the point of they're so destitute, that you become from them where they meet God. That is the mercy seat. You become for that embodiment of God when you are a true Christian, when you have that power that God has given you at some point. The reality is that when you look at this image, it's a very powerful image, it's the mercy seat. You know what happens when we get full of ourselves? So this is a very interesting story, and I'm going to, try to drive a point here. At some point, the mercy seat and the Ark of the Covenant was the sign of blessing, was the sign of healing, was the sign of God's presence, was the sign of everything that people would want in God between them and present between them. And at that time, you know very well in the Old Testament, the story when it was taken from them, the Philistines had it. But then eventually the Philistines wanted to turn it back because the right place was not between the Philistines. It was between the people of God, God's presence between the people of God. And at that time, David said, you know what, bring it back. But the reality is that when David brought it back, he had to follow the rules that God told him to do. What are these rules? These are the rules that we put for ourselves to kind of limit ourselves, our boundaries. David didn't do that. He said, you know what, they actually had rules when you go into Deuteronomy and Leviticus. They had rules that only certain people, the Levites, would have to carry it. And they would carry it on their shoulders. There was a lot of reverence there. Why did God say that? Because he had a meaning for that power to be given, that presence. David didn't heed to any of this. So they took it on a cart. And then there were two sons at that time of Abinadab. Do anyone knows where are the names of those two sons? There are two. One of them, his name was Uzzah. The other one's name was Ahio. Those two were the sons of Abinadab. And then you all know the story at that time when they put it on the ark, which completely was against God's instructions. At that time, the bull kind of fell on the side, so the ark was going to fall. And then Uzzah stretched out his hand, as you can see over here, to keep it from falling. And the amazing thing is that the mercy seat that is supposed to be the root of the mercy for human beings caused Uzzah to die right there. He died instantaneously. And David just flipped out. He had prepared this whole huge celebration that the ark was coming back, and then one of his men died right there. You know what the interesting story about this? You know what the meaning of the names of Uzzah and Ahio are? Uzzah means strength. Ahio means friendliness. So when you take your strength and power and your talent, in what you learned, in your hands, when you take your friendliness in your charm and in your being a leader in the society, and think that you will be the mercy seat to the people, you'll end up in death. You'll end up in death. When we get full of ourselves, we end up in death. We end up hurting people. We end up hurting ourselves. So what was supposed to be a source of mercy for people became a source of what? Curse. When human strength and human friendliness combined together in their best form, the result was death, not mercy. So you took something that was supposed to be as beautiful as the mercy seat, and it became the point of death. The reality is that we get very foolish. And why am I telling you this? Because you know what? At some point in your life, somebody has to tell you this. There are very few jobs, and those who are in practice here would tell you that. There are very few jobs where overnight you get transitioned from day and night. Literally, I finished my fellowship June 30th of 2005. July 1st, 2006, I made 10 times of what I made the day before. There's no job that get full of it as such. You finish, school, dental school, med school, PA school, you finish that, and all of a sudden they tell you, hey, the world is open in front of you. What is the problem with the foolish rich man? What is the problem? That he had riches? That he had a lot of stuff? His foolishness. What was his foolishness? Say again?
Couldn't let it go.
Couldn't let it go. But what did he tell himself? What did he talk? Try to remember the words he told himself.
I did it.
Different, no, about the foolish rich guy, not the young guy.
I earned it.
He said I earned it. It's like, you know what? Enjoy. Tana'ami ya nafsi. Tana'ami ya nafsi, which means what? You know what? Bask in your glory. Okay? I've really earned it. It's mine. I've done a good job. And you know what? A lot of physicians, I remember, here's another thing. When I got done with my fellowship, Everything had lined up for me after that because, you know what, I joined my practice and every one of my partners had a full list. Okay, here's what cardiologists do in this area. You see this country club? Yeah, I'll do a membership here. You see this golf course? Go over there and take some lessons. Because you know what? I never golfed in my life, and I never did after that. Okay. But this was the expectation. Surprisingly for me, as George, I went from one day to the other 10 times my salary. That first year, I ended up with more debt in my life that I'd never had before. Never had before. And to me, this is exactly what happened. This is exactly what happened. That was me. I was absolutely foolish. Why? Because you know what? The problem with a lot of you guys and a lot of us and me, myself, and you know what? Don't deny it. Don't deny it. If you are truthful to yourself, you'll actually admit it. A lot of us, when we look at ourselves, we say, you know what? I've been through school. I've been through residency. I've been through fellowship. Okay? It's a rite of passage. It's a rite of passage. Okay? I was miserable. It is my right to enjoy that. It is my right because you know what? I've worked hard. It is my right to get whatever this car, to get this house, to get the 5 ayn, al-amara wal-izba. Okay? And you know what? The reality is that when we look at our group of physicians and dentists, we're some of the most privileged people that exist on this earth. You know, they talk about the U.S. as that, if you take everyone in the U.S. as an average, we're about in the top 1% of earning income potential in the whole world, okay, as an average, okay? You take us here, and we're in the top 0.01% of the whole world. That's how our reality is. So then we can be like the rich, foolish guy and say that, you know what, it's our right, we've earned it, or we can actually listen to what life is as an exodus. Look at what God told the Israelites. Look at what they told them when they were getting close to the promised land. When they were reaching there, when they were getting to the point of actually after 40 years of suffering. Look at what he told them, okay? My power and the might of my hand have gained me wealth. You can say that in your heart, but you shall remember that your Lord, for it is He who gives you power to get wealth. The problem as human beings and as physicians and as dentists and as physician assistants and as pharmacists, especially when we start looking at the business side of practice in this country and in Egypt, trust me, in Egypt, they make far more money, okay, than what we do over here as physicians in business, okay? But a lot of us can get fooled into ourselves that we feel that, you know what, it was my hand that gave me this wealth. So why am I saying all this? And now let's wrap it up. As I said in the beginning, orthodoxy is a very incarnational form of Christianity. If you don't embody what you believe, and if the transformation doesn't come from your heart, no prescriptions, no gimmicks, nothing that I can do for you to do is going to change your heart. Out of your good heart, out of the abundance of your good heart comes good thing. So right now you have to ask yourself, why am I staying in my field? Why am I trying to be the best ever provider that can exist? Why am I trying to get to the top of my field? Why am I being competitive? Why do I go to work every day? Why do I take this money and keep it? What do I do with it? And it's not about what you do, but it's about who you are. So out of the abundance of your heart, if you embody Christ as a healer, you'll become the Christian healer. I'll say it again. If you embody Christ as a healer, you'll become the Christian healer. That is incarnation. So the bottom line, if you become Christ, you become that healing presence of power. What is the healing presence of power? Healing presence is two things, and that's what I want to end up with. True Christian healing is redemptive. You know what Abuna Sarafim was talking about sin? Where did disease come from? In our belief, in our theology as Christians? From sin. From sin. Okay? Yes, right now, yes, I understand very well, we know very well when Christ was asked, did this man, the blind man, sin or his parents? We're not talking about this, but the entrance into the human race, the decay, that's what I believe, our natures were decayed. When you heal, think about it for a second. When you heal people, you're reversing the cycle of sin. How redemptive is that? How redemptive is that? Isn't that beautiful? You aid with God in reversing the power of sin of people. When Christ came and actually said to them, the kingdom is at hand, what was the first word after that? Read it, please, for me. What was after the kingdom of heaven is at hand? What else do you want? When the sign of the kingdom of heaven comes on this earth, is by you healing people. How come we have fooled ourselves in believing that it's us who does the business? When you embody the true healer, you become the incarnated healer. The problem with us right now as physicians, as dentists, as providers, as practitioners, as pharmacists, as physician assistants, physical therapists, everyone you name it. Why? Because everyone is a healer in this area. You know what the problem with us is what? Is that we've now become de-incarnate. We go to Sunday to church, we attend the services, we attend the liturgy, we take communion, and every part of the week we have nothing to do with God. We have nothing to do with God. In fact, Mina, you asked me that question when we were in Chicago 2 weeks ago. You asked me that question, what happens to physicians when they go on the mission field? And you know, they asked a simple question, do people pray? Because we were in this Christian medical conference, and they said at that time in this group in Chicago, they actually do ask the patients, would you like me to pray with you? In the United States. And I said, you know what, we've struggled with this as a group of Coptic physicians. Why? Because we only think we can pray with people when we're outside, when we're in Kenya, when we're in Bolivia. For some of you guys who were with us in Bolivia, when you saw us praying, the sad thing to say is like, you know what, we never do it here in the United States. But then the question becomes like, you know what, can I even pray inside my heart for this person? Or have I separated myself completely? That on Sunday, I'm the man of God. Monday to Friday, I'm a man of my profession. And you know what, they don't mix. One day, God taught me a huge lesson. I struggled with this for a long time, trust me, because you know what? When you're in your practice, a lot of people tell you don't get emotionally attached to people you're treating because you know what is going to wear you out, it's going to burn you down. And that's true, especially in some fields. Some people, for example, when they talk about like pediatric oncology, they can't bear it. They can't. You know, they quit after a year or two. Some fields are really bad. But the question is that I don't have to be emotionally attached to the patients, but do I have to be spiritually detached? But that becomes then a de-incarnated healer. I remember one day at 3 o'clock in the morning, and I had been struggling, and this is the amazing thing, when you allow God in your practice to like open your heart, He's going to start sending you some messages. I remember 3 o'clock in the morning, got called in for an acute heart attack. And usually in the United States, when people come with an acute heart attack and I'm sleeping at home, when the pager goes off, I have to respond literally with 20-25 minutes. So I literally jump out of bed. I'm in my scrubs, jump out of bed, drive like a crazy madman to the hospital to get there. And for most of the time at 3 o'clock, I'm sleepy, so I usually put on like just, crank up some music just to kind of like keep me awake. And for that day, for some reason, I didn't put on the music. And, it was 3 o'clock, it was totally quiet, and it was just unbelievably peaceful and calm. It was just the most serene, moment in my life. And then I get this page again. The first time when you get the page, it's like, tells you like, heart attack in the ER room, so-and-so, no information, you don't get any information. And he just goes like, it's just like one of many that I do, okay? I'm not saying, what do I care, but I was like, after you've done 1,000 of these, it was like, I can't be attached anymore. But then I get this second page, and it's from the ER physician saying, hurry up. It's a 35-year-old mom of 3 little kids, okay? There's a 35-year-old mom of 3 little kids. And at that moment, and it was so quiet, and I put back the page, and I couldn't just help it at that time to pray. Absolutely to pray. And that was one of the words that God gave me that time. I was like, who are you not to pray for your patients before? Don't get fooled in saying that, I can't get emotionally attached to my patients. Okay? Don't get fooled into the system that tells you can't pray with them. You can pray for them. Use your power. Trust me, when patients are going to feel your presence. Remember what I said about presence? Presence is not about what you do and what you say. It's about who you are. And patients would feel it. Patients would get a sense of like, that you are something different. You carry within you power. Why? Because it's not your power. It's the power of the Lord within you. If you allow Christ in practice, Christ is going to teach you a lot of things. I remember when I was starting in this field, you almost get this sense, and this is one of the things, especially if you guys are going to get into very strong fields of medicine, especially surgical fields. You feel they've got this power. I remember one time when I just got done with my fellowship, and I had this power being so mechanical. That you know what, somebody has this abnormal heart rhythm and you just shock them, you jumpstart them and they're back again. It's like, yeah, I give him back life. It's like, who am I to say that? It became so mechanical. And I got this disconnect, as if I'm living in two different worlds. There's the world I'm living in, which is sensed, and the Word of God and the spirits, oh, that's for Sunday. That's for Sunday. Until God sends me one day this amazing, amazing story. So I got this guy who comes in with a huge heart attack, and he was like in cardiac arrest. He was completely out, not sensing anything. They're doing CPR, they're breathing for him, they're shocking him nonstop, shocked about like 40 times. And they brought him to the emergency department, and they brought him on a table, and then there is, if any one of you have seen that, there is a mechanical device that does CPR. It's called a Lucas device that just does chest compression, so we can work around it and without having somebody just doing chest compression. So the guy was absolutely dead, and then, did his case and sucked out a ton of clot from his heart and just working, and we kept losing him. And the team got tired because the whole thing took about like 2 hours. They got tired. And I kept telling them, keep going, come on, let's go. Hey guys, God, help, God, come on. And the guy was completely out. He made it eventually. And then I never got to see him after that because I was off service after that time, so my partners took care of him. And I saw him 6 months after that in clinic. He'd never seen me, prior to that. And he walks in and he tells me, Doc, I remember something. I want to ask you, were you at the time of the procedure, did you kept telling people, don't give up? I was like, yeah. He was like, how did you know? He said, I don't really know, but I remember that I felt myself, I was taken out, and I was watching everything as if I was watching a movie. And I remember you kept telling them, don't give up after 2 hours. And I was like, I want to thank you that you kept telling them. I was like, well, what are you trying to tell me there? You're trying to tell me that you watched the whole thing? And he was on a breathing machine, he was on a ventilator, he was out. He was clinically dead. He said yes. And I think this has been, there's many books that came out recently about this. But at that time, it was a message from God. This is kind of Christ in practice. So a message of God for me is like, you know what? Don't separate yourself. Don't feel yourself as like, you know what? I'm in this world, my world of doing my work, seeing my patients, writing my prescriptions, writing my note, as if you are like bipolar. You've got a spiritual you and a work you and a professional you. No, they're both the same. Don't de-incarnate yourself. Another story that would just shook me to death, because here's when Christ really starts to teach us. I remember also, I struggled at some point about the new nature. We talk about the nature, and how does the new nature mean to us? What does it mean to have a new nature in Christ? We always talk about it, you're baptized, you're in a new nature, but yet a lot of us don't even feel that difference. Why? Because we don't do anything different than people outside. And one time I struggled with this quite a bit. And here's the amazing thing, when you allow God inside your heart to do so, to start in your practice giving you hints, he'll start showing himself. So I get this guy also, and the most dramatic stories are people who came back from the dead. Why? Because it was very dramatic. These are people who are like gone. So I get this guy who also, same thing, and came back, and I see him after 6 months, first time for me to see him and follow up, because usually other people follow him up until he comes back to me. And he comes and says, what, this event really shook me. And I was like, yeah, I understand. Yeah, sure. Yeah. Yeah, I spent some more time with my son. It was like, yeah, you don't understand. It's like, if my son was not there, I would have been dead, because apparently he passed out, had the heart attack at home, and he passed out completely. If it was not for his son who called 911 and did CPR until the paramedics came, he would have been dead. I said, fine, the guy's emotional, and I'm kind of trained as like, what, I blocked myself. Okay? It was like, yeah, sure. And then, on his way out, he shook my hand. Like, let me just get your hand. Look at it. He shook my hand, and he looked at my hand, and was like, he looked at me, he's like, I'm really a new person. And I was like, yeah, whatever. And he looks at me, he's like, what, Doc, you don't understand. Heck, I even love my enemies at this point. And so I was like, what? I was like, what do you mean you love your enemies? He was like, yeah, I don't have time to hate my enemies. And it struck me right there. That is the meaning of the new nature. Because in this past nature, you know what, it was all fine for him. But now that he came back and this is like, you know what, he's got this new sense of like, you know what I have, you know what Paul said, what I have is not mine but Christ? That's exactly what he said. It's like, what I have right now, I should have not had it. I should have been dead. But now what I have, I cannot just waste it on hating people. He just like, heck, I even love my enemies. I was like, oh, okay, Christ, sorry. Sorry, okay, I learned my lesson. But the reality is that healing in your role as a provider becomes a priestly role. And if you view it as a priestly role, as a restoration of what has been lost from humanity, you are a priest in your own practice. You redeem people. You redeem yourself. You redeem yourself. You guys remember the images I showed you in the beginning about how physicians are getting burnt out, they're getting depressed, they're getting suicidal, they're getting divorced, they're not recommending anyone to do it again? If you view yourself in this role, how can you be depressed? How can you lose perspective? If you are now an agent of God in reversing the effect of sin on people, that is how it's redemptive. Healing is restoring. I want to mention a couple of examples like this, but you know what? How many times you see somebody, you know, guys, they've estimated that the number of patients that come to the ER at this point without any family members whatsoever, they're completely disconnected from their family, has tripled in the last decade. Has tripled in the last decade. Why? Because they're cut from their families. I remember vividly a guy who came in with a heart attack and he's done everything wrong in his life. Everything wrong. And after he said all that, he's like, you know, hey, we're glad that you're doing well. And the guy looks at me, he's like, yeah, not really. It's like, why? What's wrong? It's like, I wish I was dead. Why? It's like, you don't understand. You know, I'm completely disconnected from my family. I'm disconnected from my kids. My wife divorced me. They don't like me. Why? Because I'm a drunk. I smoke. I have no job. I was ready to go. And to me, it clearly showed to me, it's like, you know what, saving this guy's heart didn't restore him. Didn't restore him. The reality is that when you look at actually things, and I'm sorry I'm quoting things, but these things I know a lot about, like, you know what is the rate of depression after people who are successfully treated from heart attacks that have no residual effect? They've not, like, you know what, they lived, their hearts are absolutely fine, they're doing great, physically they have no impairment, they can walk, they can run a mile. You know what's the rate of depression? 60%. 2/3 of them. Talk about restoration. You know what's the beauty about the Bible? When Christ healed the leper, what did he tell the leper? Go and what? Show yourself to who? Why did he say go and show yourself to the priest? Because he's restoring to the community. When he raised the dead girl, what did he tell him? Give her something to eat. You're not just restoring as a provider. The problem with us when you're given as a productivity, when you're given only 15 minutes to see the patients, you have no time to restore the patient. You have no time to ask the patients, like, you know, how are you doing with your family? Okay, how are things with, you know, at home? You have no time to do that. Why? Because you are afraid that someone will come and tell you you're not productive, you're going to lose your job. You're afraid. That's what I said about when you lose control, fear takes out any sense of altruism. But if I tell you one big problem with our current medical society here, we have no restoration of health. In fact, it's horrible. It is absolutely horrible. Why? Because Christ, when you think about a Christian healer, healing is restoring. When you see Pope Francis, you know what, here's the most beautiful image. He didn't heal that guy. He can't heal him. He's got a genetic mutation that will never be healed. But what did he tell him? He restored him within the community of love. Within the community of being accepted. He restored him to that. One of the hardest things ever, for example, in my career, I do also vascular disease, is taking care of feet. You know, I've been always amazed in my profession. People would take a heart attack any day, but would not take an ulcer in their toes. They would tell you, I would survive a heart attack and have no problems, but I would not be able to survive a problem with my toe or if a toe is amputated. You know why? Because the toe shows. The heart attack is hidden. The heart attack is hidden. You know, even if you're having a heart attack and I can examine you, nobody would actually like show any kind of repulsion. But if you've got a gangrenous foot or a gangrenous toe, everyone, repels away from you. So healing is restorative. When you take these people who have all these chronic illnesses and you tell them, like, you know what, you're accepted again. That's what Pope Francis did to this guy. He didn't really cure him, but he told him, you are restored as a human being. Come and we'll love you again. So my friends here, I started with my favorite verse, which was that the power of the Lord was present to heal them. When we submit ourselves truly throughout your life, throughout your career, throughout your work, throughout your family, throughout your service at church, throughout whom you interact with at church, you affect people. When you submit to God, you yourself become that source of power. And then this is one of the verses I love. Why? Because here you see the woman who was bleeding. And when she touched Christ, Christ said, because I felt power came out of me and went into her. And trust me when I tell you, when you submit yourself to God, you will feel that power leaving you, not leaving you, but coming out of you to touch people. It's the power of the Holy Spirit. That is the healing presence. That is when you become source of healing to others, you are a source of power to others. So my dear friends, we've talked in the last 45 minutes about the Christian healer. As I told you, I'm not going to give you some just easy prescriptions of how to behave, how to take a medical history or an examination. It's far deeper than that. The incarnation of Christ changed us from inside out. If you want to become a true Christian healer that has a perspective and a vision, go back to the Bible and read. How did Christ view this? You can have it your own way, just like the image of man, like Adam and Eve requested. Your own glory. But look at the amount of dissatisfaction that people have at the end. Okay? But then you can have it your own way. And look what God would do. I'm going to leave you with one final visual image. In your life, you're either a 0 or a 1. The 1 is the maximum you could be. The 1 embodies your maximum capacity. You cannot be anything more than a 1. The 1, which is the oneness of you, right? Is you as a person. Or you can decide to be a 0 and decide God to be the 1. So you have a couple of options. Either to become 1, okay, and say that, you know what, I'm it. I don't believe in God. I don't want God's healing power. I've got my science, I've got my knowledge, I've got my evolution, I've got my tools, I've got everything, I've got money, the richest health system in the whole world, okay? I've got everything. I don't need God. You can decide and say, well, you know what, I'm going to allow God into the equation. That's okay. But I'm going to be first. I'm going to be first. The reality is that when you become first, only one person can be one, either you or God. And it has to be God. But here's the reality, is like, you know what? You get your 0 first and then a 1. God comes after that. What is that number at the end? Still a 0. Still a 0. If you reverse the role, you put God first, all of a sudden your 1 became a 10. All of a sudden your 1 became a 10. When we submit ourselves to God, we become more powerful. So instead of actually you achieving only the maximum, which is the 1, you become a 10. What imagines if you submit even more? The power of this equation is that it's very ironic. Because you've got the 1 of God in the beginning, the more you humble yourself and become a 0, the more you grow. The more zeros you add to this equation at the end of it, the bigger the number is. Right? Because you've got the 1 of God in the beginning. That is the power. So the more we humble ourselves and submit ourselves to God, the more God will use us. The more God will actually make wonders of us. The more you multiply to almost, you can't count anymore. The reality, guys, is that you have been given a tremendous amount of power in your life. You've been given a tremendous amount of talent, a tremendous amount of resources. You're very much like that rich guy. You're very much like him. Either you be smart or you be a foolish person. You're going to get to use them in your life. It's very, very touching when you can do things with people that no one else can do, when you touch them in the closest part of their heart of their lives. So either you use this power to the glory of God, or you use it to your own glory. Either you become a Christian healer, or you become just you. Amen? All right. Let's stand up for prayer a little bit. I want us to take a couple minutes to pray about this, and then you can answer any questions after.